Welcome back to What Arty Noobs with General Disturbance. This is the T1 heavy tank. It's a tier 5 American heavy tank. It's located on the southwest spawn of highway, and it's under the commands of Wazwulf of REBRN. Okay, game started. Now this is quite an interesting tank because it had a long history of development, but it never got put into production. Originally, it was a project that was started in May 1940 alongside a project for the M3, so they were being built at the same time, and the Americans felt that they needed their heavy tank to match their medium tank, but they came up with various changes to the design along the way. And the T1 heavy tank was, well, basically the version which was called the T1E2, because they have various stages and they got various development names, and obviously a T name is one that you get when it's being developed, whereas an M name is what's assigned to you once you've actually got a production. Now the T1 heavy tank, as I said, never got put into production, but they built a staggering number of 43 tanks during the development phases of this vehicle. It was supposed to be a cast hull, and it was also supposed to have various different drives, including a petrol engine developing or turning electric drive, and they also had a version which was a diesel engine, and that had a hydropneumatic drive as well. In fact, originally it started out with the Wright's G200 engine, and eventually it ended up with the 4 diesel engines generating the hydropneumatic transmission in the rear. And the hydromatic suspension was an automatic gearbox, so it meant that when you're actually driving it, the driver didn't have to keep changing gears. The machine would do it for him, which actually saved him a lot of hard work. Now at the moment you're seeing the 76mm gun which is firing. Now that gun is capable of doing 115 alpha, 128mm of pen. It's basically the same gun you'd find on the M4, but it's actually not real, because the T1 heavy tank never used the 76mm gun. In fact, it used the 3-inch M7 gun, which is the same gun as on the M10 and the M10 RBFM. Now, it has got a reasonably good reload time. 3.3 seconds is what Wazwulf's got, but the standard is 3.45, so he has knocked a bit off. You can see it's very accurate, but in actual fact, in the game, it's actually quite a bad dispersion. So although it's got a decent rate of fire and good penetration, it's actually not as accurate as you'd like. He's getting good damage on these enemies. Now, one of the bad things about this tank is the fact that it does have fairly bad armour, but the bad armour is really on the side and on the rear. It's got reasonably good front armour, but you have to remember to keep your armour to the front, or at least only angle 20 degrees, otherwise the side of the vehicle is so thick, as you can see there, so big, that it's very easy to pen, especially with high explosive rounds. You can see Wazwulf's having a great time here because he's racked up 1800 hit points of damage so far of these enemy vehicles, and he's just pummeling them to death. And even though he's being attacked by numerous enemy tanks, he's already picked up 1 kill there, and most of the enemy that he's facing are suffering severe damage due to him. And the only damage he's really had is a loss of a few hit points and damaged tracks. And he's now killed 2 enemy. Oh, no, he took a hit there from the T6 medium, which is basically the M4 prototype. The Largo's trying to angle, but he's not angling well. And of course, Wazwulf's just going to go straight through his armour. Yep, T6 tried again. In fact, the T6 is firing HE because he's having difficulty trying to pen with AP. A lot of the rounds were bouncing. He's blocked 1,300 hit points of damage. This is where he might actually suffer some damage because he's actually advancing on the enemy now, and they might get a chance to shoot at his side or rear. Okay, he's still got his front to the enemy, but the Largo's trying to get alongside him, and that's what you need to do with a T1. Try and get alongside them and shoot into their sides, not their front. If you can hit the sides of a T1, you can take them out, especially if you can catch them in a crossfire. Now, one of the other things that's good about a T1 heavy tank is its speed. It is reasonably fast. It's also quite heavy, and that makes a big difference. It's 61 tons in total. You can imagine a fast 61-ton tank going 35 kilometers an hour rams into you with that heavy weight. Yeah, you're going to take a huge hit for damage from a ramming hit from one of these. So never allow one to ram you from the front, because if he does, I think you're probably going to be either suffering a massive loss of hit points or out of the game altogether. Now, it does have fairly good agility, actually, which is surprising for its heavy weight. So again, watch out, because these things can maneuver fairly quickly. And of course, I should mention as well, the M6 heavy tank is actually basically the updated version of the T1 Heavy. He's got his first hit on that T1 Heavy at distance, and you notice how his shells are going straight through that T1 Heavy because he's hitting the side of him. Whereas the enemy's tanks were having a lot of difficulty trying to pen him, he's not having so much difficulty. In fact, the only part of the tank he can see at the moment is the turret, and he's trying to get a shot on that, but yeah, the T1 suddenly realised he has to pull back, but he is taking a lot of damage. And he's fending off our guys. But Wazwulf's shells were going through, and there goes the last enemy. And it's a victory. And it looks like Wazwulf might have got the high caliber. Here's the end of battle results, and that was an ace tanker game for Wazwulf in the T1 heavy tank. Yes, he took on most of the enemy team almost single-handedly for quite a few minutes over there on the in the town. But after he'd actually dealt with most of those guys and killed a few of them, he was free to then move to the enemy cap area, and of course then we saw the destruction of the enemy T1 heavy tank, because of course he wasn't doing what Wazwulf was doing, was keeping the enemy far enough away so they couldn't hit his weak spots. He managed to get a Hand of God for surviving the battle, having received damage from 4 different enemies, a Bruiser medal for getting at least 5 critical hits, in fact he got 10. He got a Duelist for taking down 2 tanks who damaged him, a Fighter badge for getting at least 4 kills, he got 4 exactly, and a Fire for effect for doing more damage than the hit points of his own vehicle, as well as a Shell Proof for blocking more damage than the hit points of his own vehicle. He got a Cool Headed for surviving 10 or more ricochets non-penetrating shots in a row, and most of those enemy tanks were just lining up to shoot the front of his vehicle, not realising that you have to hit the sides and the rear of a T1 Heavy. He got a Confederate for hitting more of the enemy and damaging more of the enemy than anyone else on his team. A Steel Wall for blocking the most damage in that game. And yes, he did get the high caliber for dealing the most damage in the game as well. So that's a pretty good set of medals from a battle which basically he was carrying out single-handedly against virtually all of the enemy teams and the enemy tanks in the town. So let's have a look at team score. Well, there you go, right at the top of the table, and just look at that damage score, 3,338 hit points at tier 5. That's a very high score, which means that basically it was him who was conducting the battle against all of the enemy. In fact, none of his teammates managed to get over 1,000 hit points. None of them. The only one that got close was the 82, 950 hit points. And remember, he's got very heavy armor and he's very slow, which means it's much easier for him to get a huge amount of hit points from just banging away at the enemy than it is for somebody like Wazwulf, who does have weak spots, weak armor on the sides and the rear. So, a lot of damage by him. Let's have a look at kills. Well, yeah, he shared the top spot for kills as well, because the only other one who could get as much was the Jagdpanzer 38T, the Hetzer, who managed 4 kills as well. And the third highest damage was the T1 Heavy on the enemy team. Well, you should expect that, yes, because he is quite good. As top tier, this tank is very good. If it's bottom tier or middle tier, it suffers, because it can only really work as a support tank because of that weak side armor. When it came to base XP, yeah, he's got that one as well. So he's got the top in all 3 columns. 1,627 went to Wazwulf. 568, that's the next highest score. 1/3 of the amount that he managed to get. 568 went to the Panzerkampfwagen 2 Ausrung L, which is the Lux. And then 499 rather went to the T1 Heavy on the enemy team. He's the 3rd highest base XP. So both T1s managed to do very well. He fired 47 rounds of, well, it was 76mm ammunition that he was firing, but in actual fact in the game, it would, in reality, if it had gone into action, it would have been the 3-inch ammunition that he would have been firing, the same as an M10. And you know how good the M10 RBFM is in the game with the 3-inch gun. It's very, very good indeed. 32 direct hits, 30 penetrations on the enemy. So very good on the penetration. That gun is actually quite decent. It will pen tier 5s quite normally, quite reasonably. 338 hit points of damage, 3,338 hit points of damage, 686 of which was at more than 300 meters. Those were the shots he was firing at the T1 Heavy at some range, and I was impressed by that because the dispersion on this tank is not very good. It's actually quite poor, which means that shells tend not to go near the aim point. They tend to go away, but he was letting those shots dial in and being careful enough to actually get them on the weak spot that was visible, which was the side of the turret. 34 hits received from the enemy, only 14 of which actually penetrated. It actually doesn't show any penetrations at all, actually. Sorry, I'm wrong. 20 non-penetrations and 14 splash damage. So those are the HE rounds that were fired at him, which knocked off hit points, but actually didn't pen. So I'm wrong about that. There was no pens. 1,480 hit points of damage blocked by armor, 8 enemy vehicles spotted, 10 enemy vehicles damaged, 4 killed, and 1,200 hit points of damage assistance. But by being up front and blasting away at the enemy, he was allowing his teammates behind him to actually get pot shots on the enemy, which helped him to defeat them in the end. 46,631 credits from the game, 77,279 from Holiday Ops and the boosters. And after repair and ammunition resupply, took away a profit of 142,118 credits. Not bad for tier 5. 1,627 XP times 2 for the first victory, 4,882 experience points altogether. Well, the T1 heavy tank, it never saw action, but well, they were intending to build quite a few. An order was placed for 115 to 230, and it was supposedly going to be actually issued as either the T1, which would be kept in the United States, and the M6, which was actually going to go into action as a Lend-Lease tank, and that was going to be sold to Great Britain. But the orders were cancelled, so they never went ahead and built them. In fact, the reason for this was that they actually thought that 2 M4s, which could be built for the price of a T1, I think it was, would be better than 1 T1. Now, the US forces, when they invaded Normandy, actually thought the opposite. They thought that they needed heavy tanks and they needed them quick because they were coming up against Tiger 2s and Tiger 1s, and they didn't have anything that could actually reply except for the Firefly, the British Sherman, which with the 17-pounder gun. That was the only thing that they had which could actually reliably take out a Tiger. But they needed heavy tanks, and they needed them desperately, but the US Army didn't go ahead with this project. They relied upon their mediums instead, and of course we then found out that if you have a huge number of mediums, then even a medium tank can take down a heavy tank like a Tiger if you have enough of them. You may lose most of those medium tanks in the process, as we saw in the film Fury, But even if you do lose most of them, you still get the enemy heavy tank in the end, simply by having huge numbers of medium tanks fire at them from all different directions. I hope you enjoyed that that little video in the history. Very well done to Wazwulf. I mean, crumbs, takes a lot of courage to stand out there and plug away at the enemy when everyone is firing at you. But he did everything correctly. He didn't move forward, didn't expose his weak spots, didn't angle himself in any way to let the enemy get hits on you. And he just blasted it away with that 76mm round to get as much damage as he could. And he certainly picked up a lot. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and thank you for watching.